Get out! Take your bastard and get out!
The snow fell in silent sheets over Seoul, but inside the penthouse, all Belfrek Kingsley could hear was her husband's voice, cold and sharp as broken glass. Get out, take your bastard and get out. Her hands trembled over her swollen belly, 9 months heavy with life, as she stood in the doorway of what used to be her home. Christmas lights blinked mockingly through the window. Her phone buzzed. Wrong number. She typed desperately into the darkness. Please help me. I have nowhere to go. The reply came instantly. Location now. She didn't know she'd just texted the most dangerous man in Seoul. She didn't know Kang Min-ho had been watching her for months. She didn't know that the moment he saw her name on his screen, something ancient and possessive roared awake inside his chest, and the world as she knew it would never be the same. Welcome to K-Fairy Tales Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Belfrek stood on the sidewalk, her suitcase tipping over in the snow. Her coat barely closed over her belly. She stared at her phone, at the address that had appeared below the stranger's message. Gangnam, an area she'd only seen in magazines. Her fingers were numb. She had no money for a cab. No family in Korea. No friends who'd answered her calls tonight. She looked up at the penthouse one last time and saw her husband's silhouette in the window, another woman's arms around his waist. Something inside her cracked, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to break, not yet. Not with a baby depending on her. She dragged her suitcase through the snow toward the subway station. Across the city, Kang Min-ho sat in his office on the 40th floor of a building his family owned. Outside, the Seoul skyline glittered like a predator's eyes. Inside, silence. His men knew better than to disturb him after midnight. But his phone had buzzed, a message from an unknown number that should never have reached him. His private line was untraceable, unlisted, known only to 5 people in the world. Yet somehow this woman, this Belfrek, had texted him. He stared at the words on his screen. The desperation, the fear, the pregnant belly emoji she'd added, probably by accident. His jaw tightened. He stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out without a word. His driver knew not to ask questions. Belfrek made it to the subway before her legs gave out. She collapsed onto a bench, gasping, one hand pressed to her belly. The baby kicked hard, as if sensing her panic. She whispered to the child inside her, promised everything would be okay, even though she had no idea how. The station was nearly empty. A few strangers glanced at her and looked away. No one helped. She checked her phone. The address was still there. Gangnam Station, 15 minutes by train. She didn't know who she was meeting. Didn't care. She had no other options. She stood, gripped her suitcase, and walked toward the platform. Min-ho's car pulled up outside Gangnam Station 20 minutes later. He stepped out into the cold, his long black coat dusted with snow. His men followed at a distance, silent shadows. He didn't need to tell them to stay back. They knew. His eyes scanned the crowd, the late-night stragglers, the drunk salarymen stumbling home. Then he saw her. A woman, heavily pregnant, dragging a suitcase that was too big for her to carry. Her coat was thin, her face was exhausted, and when she looked up, when their eyes met across the snowy plaza, something in Min-ho's chest stopped, then started again, different, heavier, hotter. He walked toward her before he could think. Belfrek froze when she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the crowd like a knife through silk. People stepped aside without knowing why. His face was beautiful in a way that made her heart stutter. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, lips pressed into a line that looked like controlled fury. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive and clean. He looked down at her belly, then back at her face. His voice was low, rough, accented. You texted me. It wasn't a question. She nodded, too tired to be afraid. He reached for her suitcase without asking, lifted it like it weighed nothing. Come. She followed him because she had no choice. Because something in his voice made her feel, for the first time in hours, like maybe she wasn't completely alone. He led her to a car that looked like it cost more than her entire life. Opened the door, waited. She hesitated. I don't know you. He looked at her and something flickered in his eyes. No, but I'm the only reason you're not sleeping on the street tonight. She got in the car. He closed the door gently, as if she were made of glass. Then he walked around and slid into the seat beside her. The driver pulled away from the curb without a word. Belfrek stared out the window, her hands folded over her belly. Thank you, Min-ho didn't respond. He watched her reflection in the glass. The curve of her cheek, the exhaustion in her posture, the way she held herself together. even though she was clearly falling apart. He'd seen desperate people before, seen them beg, cry, break. But this woman, this stranger who'd texted him by mistake, sat in his car like a queen in exile, tired but undefeated, and something about that made his hands curl into fists. He wanted to know who had hurt her. Wanted to know why she was alone on Christmas Eve, pregnant and abandoned. Wanted to burn down whoever was responsible. He forced himself to look away. The car stopped in front of a building that made Belfrec's breath catch. Glass and steel towering into the night sky. A doorman appeared instantly, opened her door, bowed. Minho stepped out and offered his hand. She took it because her legs were shaking. His palm was warm, rough, strong. He didn't let go as he led her inside, past a lobby that looked like a hotel, into an elevator that required a key card. They rode up in silence. 40 floors. The doors opened directly into a penthouse, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that looked like art. A view of Seoul that stole what little breath she had left. Minho set her suitcase down and turned to face her. "You'll stay here tonight? Tomorrow we'll talk." Belfrec stared at him. "I can't pay you." His expression didn't change. "I didn't ask you to," she swallowed. "Why are you helping me?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because you asked." His voice was soft, but there was something underneath it, something dark and certain. "And because anyone who would throw a pregnant woman out into the snow doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you." Her eyes stung. She looked away, blinking hard. He watched her fight against tears and felt something twist in his chest. He wanted to touch her, wanted to pull her close and promise her things he had no right to promise. Instead, he stepped back. "There's food in the kitchen. Bedroom is down the hall. You're safe here." He turned toward the door. She called after him. "Wait, what's your name?" He paused, looked back over his shoulder. "Minho." Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing behind him, leaving her alone in his home. Belfrec stood in the center of the penthouse, her heart pounding. She didn't know who Kang Minho was, didn't know why he'd helped her. But as she walked toward the bedroom, as she sank onto a bed softer than clouds, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her life had just changed, and she wasn't sure if she should be grateful or terrified. She fell asleep before she could decide. Minho returned to his office but didn't work. He sat in the dark, staring at his phone. At the message that had started all of this, he'd had his people trace the number within minutes, knew her full name. Knew she'd been married to a corporate lawyer who'd been cheating on her for 6 months. Knew the baby was due in 2 weeks. Knew everything except why the sight of her standing in the snow had made him feel like someone had reached into his chest and rearranged his bones. He wasn't a good man, wasn't the kind of person who helped strangers out of kindness. His world was built on violence, control, loyalty bought with blood. But when he'd seen her, something had shifted. Something he didn't have a name for. He told himself it was temporary. Told himself he'd let her stay until she figured things out, then send her on her way. Told himself he wouldn't get involved. He'd been lying to himself for years. This was just one more lie. Except this time he almost believed it. The next morning, Belfrec woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all crashed back. Her husband, the snow, the stranger. She sat up slowly, one hand on her belly. The baby was quiet this morning. She walked out of the bedroom and found the penthouse empty. But there was food on the counter. Fresh fruit, pastries, a note in sharp, clean handwriting. "Eat, I'll be back this evening." She picked up a strawberry and bit into it, sweetness exploding on her tongue. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. Hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had thought about whether she'd eaten. She sat at the counter and cried while she ate breakfast. Minho spent the day handling business. A shipment that had gone missing. A rival family making noise about territory. A politician who needed reminding about the terms of their arrangement. He moved through his world with the same cold efficiency he always had. But every few hours he checked his phone. Checked the security feed from his penthouse. Watched Belfrec move through his space like a ghost. Watched her sit by the window, one hand on her belly, staring out at the city. Watched her fall asleep on his couch, exhausted even though she'd just woken up. And every time he looked at that screen, something in him grew heavier. More certain, more dangerous. By evening, he'd made a decision. He walked into the penthouse just after sunset and found her in the kitchen, trying to cook. She turned when she heard him, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. She was wearing different clothes now, something soft and loose that draped over her belly. Her hair was down, her face was bare. She looked younger than he'd thought. More vulnerable, more beautiful. He set his briefcase down and walked toward her. You don't have to cook, she shrugged. I wanted to thank you. He stopped in front of her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. You don't owe me anything. She looked up at him, and something passed between them. Something neither of them understood yet. Then why are you doing this? He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, and he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Instead, he reached past her and turned off the stove. Come, sit, we need to talk. They sat across from each other at the dining table. The city glittered below them. Minho poured her water, watched her drink. Then he leaned back in his chair and studied her. Tell me what happened, Belfrek hesitated. Then slowly she told him everything. The affair, the accusations, the way her husband had looked at her like she was nothing, the cold, the fear, the baby kicking inside her while she stood alone in the snow. Minho listened without interrupting. His face didn't change. But his hands resting on the table slowly curled into fists. When she finished, the silence was heavy. He'll regret it. Minho's voice was soft, but there was something underneath it that made Belfrek's pulse quicken. She looked at him. What do you mean? He met her eyes. I mean, he'll regret ever laying a hand on you, ever making you feel small, ever throwing you away like you were disposable. She swallowed. You don't even know me. His smile was slow, dangerous. No, but I'm going to. The way he said it made something flutter in her chest, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. She looked away, her cheeks warm. I need to find a place to stay. I can't impose on you forever. Minho leaned forward. You're not imposing. You're staying here. I can't. You can. His tone left no room for argument. You're 9 months pregnant. You have no money. No support. Nowhere to go. You'll stay here until after the baby is born. Then we'll figure out what comes next. Belfrek stared at him. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked around the table, and stopped beside her chair. Looked down at her with eyes that burned. Because the moment you texted me, you became my responsibility. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to process the way he looked at her. Like she was something precious. Something worth protecting. She only knew that when he walked away, when he disappeared into his office and left her alone, she felt the absence of him like a physical thing. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel afraid. The days that followed were strange. Minho left early and came back late, but he always checked on her. Always made sure she had everything she needed. He hired a doctor to examine her, a housekeeper to help her, a driver in case she wanted to go anywhere. He asked for nothing in return. Belfrek tried to make sense of it. Tried to understand why a man like him, clearly powerful, clearly dangerous, would go out of his way for a stranger. But every time she asked, he deflected, changed the subject. Looked at her with those dark eyes that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. She stopped asking, started watching him instead. She noticed the way he moved. Controlled, deliberate, like a man who'd spent his life fighting. She noticed the scars on his hands, the way his men spoke to him with a mixture of fear and reverence, the phone calls he took in languages she didn't understand. She wasn't naive. She knew he wasn't an ordinary businessman, knew there was something darker underneath the expensive suits and polite manners. But instead of scaring her, it made her curious, made her want to know who Kang Minho really was, made her wonder why he'd chosen to save her. 1 week after she'd moved in, everything changed. Minho came home earlier than usual. Belfrek was in the living room reading. She looked up when she heard the door, and her breath caught. He looked furious. His jaw was tight. His eyes were cold. He walked past her without a word, poured himself a drink, downed it in one swallow. She stood slowly, her heart pounding. What happened? He didn't answer. Just stared out the window, his shoulders tense. She walked toward him, stopped a few feet away. Minho, he turned, and the look in his eyes made her stomach flip. Your husband filed for divorce. Her breath left her lungs. What? Minho's voice was flat. He's claiming you abandoned him, that the baby isn't his. He wants nothing to do with either of you. Belfrek's legs went weak. She sat down hard on the couch, one hand pressed to her belly. Minho crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt in front of her. Breathe, she tried. Failed, tried again. He can't do that. The baby is his. I know. Minho's voice was gentle now. He reached up, cupped her face with one hand. I know, and I'll prove it. But right now, you need to breathe. She looked at him, at the way he was looking at her, and something inside her broke. She started to cry. Not delicate tears, but deep, shaking sobs that came from a place she'd been holding locked for months. Minho pulled her forward, wrapped his arms around her, let her cry into his shoulder. He didn't tell her to stop. Didn't try to fix it, just held her. And in that moment, something shifted between them. Something neither of them could take back. When Belfrek finally stopped crying, she pulled back, embarrassed. Her face was wet. Her eyes were swollen. She tried to apologize, but Minho shook his head. Don't. His thumb brushed across her cheek, wiping away a tear. You're allowed to break. You've been holding yourself together for too long. She looked at him. Really looked at him. And saw something in his expression that made her pulse quicken. Something raw. Something possessive. Why do you care so much? His jaw tightened. He stood abruptly, put distance between them. Get some rest. We'll deal with your husband tomorrow. He walked away before she could respond. Left her sitting on the couch, her heart pounding, wondering what she'd just seen in his eyes. That night, Belfrek couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, one hand on her belly. The baby was restless tonight, kicking and turning. She whispered to the child, promised her everything would be okay, even though she had no idea if that was true. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and walked to the kitchen for water. She found Minho standing by the window, still dressed, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He turned when he heard her. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the dark penthouse. Then he spoke. You should be sleeping. She walked toward him. So should you. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I don't sleep much. She stopped beside him, looked out at the city. What do you do, really? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, things that would make you run if you knew. She turned to face him. Try me. His eyes met hers, and she saw something flicker there, something like warning, like desire. My family controls half the underground economy in Seoul. Shipping, real estate, information. We're not criminals in the traditional sense, but we're not innocent either. I've hurt people, destroyed lives. He expected her to flinch, to step back. Instead, she said, and yet you saved me. His breath caught. That's different. Why? He set his glass down, turned to face her fully. Because you're different. The way he said it made heat bloom in her chest. Made her aware of how close they were standing. How his eyes had dropped to her lips. How the air between them had changed. Charged with something electric. She should step back, should put distance between them. Instead, she asked, how long have you been watching me? His expression darkened. What? She'd noticed the way he always knew what she needed before she asked. The way he'd known about the divorce before she did. The way he looked at her sometimes. Like he'd been studying her for years. You knew who I was before I texted you. Didn't you? Minho didn't deny it. I saw you 3 months ago. At a charity gala. You were with your husband. His voice had gone rough. You were wearing a green dress. You laughed at something someone said and I couldn't look away. I had you investigated. Learned everything about you. Where you lived, what you liked, who you were married to. He stepped closer. I told myself it was just curiosity. That I'd forget about you. But then you texted me. And I knew. Knew what? Her voice was barely a whisper. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her skin. That I'd never let you go. The confession hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Belfrek's heart was racing. She should be afraid. Should be disturbed by his obsession. Instead, all she felt was heat, want. A pull toward him that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Minho, tell me to stop. His hand slid to her jaw, tilted her face up. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away. I'll help you get back on your feet, and I'll never touch you again. She couldn't say it, couldn't lie, because she did feel it. Had been feeling it since the moment their eyes met in the snow. This impossible magnetic pull toward a man who should terrify her, but instead made her feel safer than she'd ever felt. She reached up, covered his hand with hers. I don't want you to stop. Something in his control snapped. He pulled her close, one hand sliding into her hair, the other careful against her lower back, mindful of her belly. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. You're pregnant, vulnerable. I'm not fragile. Her voice was steady. And I'm not afraid of you. His eyes searched hers. Then he leaned down and kissed her. Slow, deep, devastatingly gentle, like he was memorizing the taste of her. Like he'd been starving for this moment. Belfrek melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss was everything. Months of loneliness. Weeks of tension, days of unspoken desire. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Minho rested his forehead against hers. You're mine now. It should have sounded possessive. Controlling instead, it sounded like a vow. Like a promise, she whispered, "Okay." He kissed her again, deeper this time, then swept her into his arms. She gasped, clutched at his shoulders. "Minho, I'm too heavy. You're perfect." He carried her to his bedroom, set her down gently on his bed. The room was dark except for the city lights streaming through the windows. He stood over her, his chest rising and falling, his eyes burning. "If you want to stop, tell me now." She reached for him, pulled him down beside her. "I don't want to stop." What happened next was slow, reverent, his hands on her skin, her breath in his ear, whispered words and swallowed moans. He was careful with her, achingly gentle, but there was hunger underneath. Possession.need, and when they finally came together, when he buried his face in her neck and breathed her name like a prayer, Belfrek felt something inside her chest crack open, felt herself falling into something she couldn't name. Later, as they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his hand protective over her belly, she felt the baby kick. Minho went still. "Was that—" She smiled. "Yeah." He pressed his palm flat against her stomach, felt another kick. Something shifted in his expression. Something soft and dangerous. "I'm going to protect both of you." His voice was fierce. "Anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first." She believed him, and that terrified her. Because she was starting to realize that Kang Minho wasn't just dangerous to her enemies. He was dangerous to her heart. When Belfrek woke, the bed was empty. Panic flared in her chest. She sat up, looked around the unfamiliar room. Then she heard voices from the hallway. Low tense. She pulled on Minho's shirt, walked to the door.
Minho was standing in the hallway, fully dressed, talking to one of his men.
When he saw her, his expression softened. He said something sharp in Korean, and the man disappeared. Then he walked to her, cupped her face. "I have to go." Her stomach dropped. "When will you be back?" "Tonight." But something in his eyes made her afraid. She grabbed his wrist. "What's wrong?" He hesitated. Then he said, "Your husband is making threats. Spreading rumors, trying to ruin your reputation before the divorce is finalized." Anger flashed through her. "Let him." Minho's smile was cold. "I intend to." He kissed her forehead. "Stay here. Don't leave the penthouse. I'll have men outside." "Minho, trust me," she nodded, watched him leave, and tried to ignore the fear crawling up her spine. The day passed slowly. Belfrek tried to distract herself, read, watched television, ate the food the housekeeper prepared, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. By evening, she was pacing. The baby was restless, too, kicking hard enough to make her wince. She pressed a hand to her belly. "I know, baby, I'm worried too." The sun set, the city lights came on. Still no word from Minho. She tried calling, no answer. Texted, nothing. Panic started to build. Then, around 9 o'clock, the elevator doors opened. But it wasn't Minho who stepped out. It was 3 men she didn't recognize, and they were smiling. Belfrek backed away, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" The tallest one spoke in accented English. "Friends of your husband. He's very upset that you ran away." Ice flooded her veins. "Get out," he laughed. "We're here to deliver a message." They moved toward her. She ran. Made it to the bedroom, tried to lock the door. But they were faster, stronger. One of them grabbed her arm, yanked her back. She screamed, fought, but she was 9 months pregnant and outnumbered. They dragged her toward the elevator. She clawed at them, desperate, terrified not for herself but for her baby. "Please, I'm pregnant, please," the tall one backhanded her. Pain exploded across her face. The world tilted. And the last thing she heard before everything went black was the sound of the elevator doors closing. Minho walked into his penthouse 2 hours later and knew immediately something was wrong. The silence was too complete, too cold. He called her name. No answer. He moved through the space, his heart pounding harder with each empty room. Then he saw it. Blood on the floor, a broken vase, signs of a struggle. Rage unlike anything he'd ever felt crashed through him. He pulled out his phone, made a call. "Find her now." His second-in-command hesitated. "Boss, we don't know who—" "I don't care who took her. I don't care where they are. Find her, or I burn this city to the ground." He hung up, stood in the center of his penthouse, breathing hard, his hands shaking. Someone had taken her, taken his woman. His responsibility. The mother of a child he'd already started thinking of as his. And they would pay. He would make them beg for death before he was done. His phone rang 20 minutes later. "We found her warehouse in Incheon. Your wife's husband hired local thugs. They're holding her there." Minho was moving before the sentence finished. How many? 6. Leave them alive. I want to handle it myself. He grabbed his gun, his knife, got in his car, and drove toward Incheon with murder in his heart. Belfrek came to slowly. Her head throbbed, her face ached. She was tied to a chair in a dark, cold space that smelled like rust and fear. Panic clawed at her throat. She tried to move, but the ropes were tight. Tried to scream, but her mouth was gagged. Then she felt it. Wetness between her legs. Pressure low in her belly. No. The baby, it was too early. But her body didn't care. Contractions started, slow at first, then faster. Harder. She couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only feel pain and terror as her body tried to bring new life into this nightmare. One of the men noticed, laughed. Looks like the baby's coming. Should we help? The others joined in, mocking cruel. Belfrek closed her eyes and prayed. For her baby, for herself. For Minho to find her before it was too late. Then the lights went out. Gunshots, screaming. The sound of bones breaking. Belfrek couldn't see anything, but she could hear. Could hear someone moving through the darkness like death itself. Could hear men begging, pleading. Then silence. The lights came back on. Minho stood in the center of the warehouse. Blood on his hands, bodies at his feet. He was breathing hard, his eyes wild. Then he saw her, everything else ceased to exist. He crossed the space in seconds, knelt in front of her, cut the ropes, pulled the gag from her mouth. Belfrek, the baby. Her voice broke. Minho, the baby's coming. His face went white. He scooped her into his arms, ran for the car. Hold on. Just hold on. She gripped his shirt, tried to breathe through the pain. I'm scared. He looked down at her, and his eyes were fierce. I've got you both. Nothing's going to happen to you, I swear it. They made it to the hospital in record time. Minho carried her through the emergency room doors, shouting for help. Nurses rushed forward. Doctors appeared. They tried to take her from his arms. He wouldn't let go. Sir, you have to— I'm not leaving her. His voice was raw. I'm not leaving her. Belfrek reached up, touched his face. It's okay, I'll be okay. He looked at her like she was the only thing holding him together. Then finally, reluctantly, he let the doctors take her. Watched them wheel her toward the delivery room. And stood in the hallway, covered in blood that wasn't his, shaking. One of his men appeared beside him. Boss, the husband, bring him to me. His voice was empty, cold. I want to see him tonight. Inside the delivery room, Belfrek fought, pushed, screamed. The pain was unbearable. The fear was worse. But through it all, she thought of Minho, of his hands on her face, his promise that everything would be okay, his vow to protect her. And when the baby finally came, when she heard that first cry, when they placed her daughter on her chest, she looked down at the tiny, perfect face and whispered, We made it, baby. We made it, the nurse smiled. She's beautiful. Does she have a name? Belfrek looked toward the door, wondered if Minho was still out there, wondered if he'd keep his promises now that the crisis had passed, wondered if he'd stay or if, like everyone else, he'd disappear. The door opened. Minho walked in, his eyes going immediately to the bed. To her, to the baby in her arms. He stopped, stared, and something in his expression cracked. He crossed to her, knelt beside the bed, looked at the tiny child like she was a miracle. She's here. Belfrek's voice was exhausted. Emotional. She's perfect. Minho reached out, touched the baby's tiny hand. She gripped his finger, and Belfrek watched something transform in him. Watched him fall completely, irreversibly in love. He looked up at her. What's her name? Belfrek smiled through tears. I was thinking, Nari? It means lily in Korean. His eyes went bright. He leaned forward, kissed her forehead. It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect. He stayed with her all night, held her hand, held the baby, refused to leave even when the nurses told him visiting hours were over, and Belfrek, exhausted and overwhelmed and still terrified of what came next, let herself believe, let herself hope. 3 days later, Belfrek was released from the hospital. Minho took her and Nari back to the penthouse. He'd prepared everything, a nursery, baby clothes, every possible thing they might need. But as the days passed, Belfrek started to notice things. The way Minho would disappear for hours, the tension in his shoulders, the phone calls he took in other rooms. She told herself it was just business. Told herself he was just busy. But doubt crept in, whispered, You're a burden. You're not his responsibility. He'll get tired of you. On the 5th night, she made a decision. She would leave, find her own place, figure out how to survive on her own. She couldn't keep depending on a man who'd already given her so much. It wasn't fair to him. That night, after Minho left for another meeting, Belfrek packed a bag, wrote a note, thanked him for everything, took Nari and slipped out of the penthouse. She made it to a hotel. Cheap, basic, but hers. She fed Nari, rocked her to sleep, and tried to convince herself she'd made the right choice. Minho came home to an empty penthouse. At first, he didn't understand. Then he saw the note. Rage and panic exploded through him in equal measure. He called her. No answer. Called again. Nothing. He had his people track her phone, found the hotel, and drove there with his heart in his throat. He pounded on the door until she opened it. She looked exhausted, beautiful, holding Nari against her chest. He pushed past her into the room, looked around at the shabby space, and felt something inside him break. "What are you doing?" His voice was rough. Belfrek lifted her chin. "What I should have done from the beginning, standing on my own. By running away, I'm not running. I'm leaving, there's a difference." He took a step toward her. "You left because you think I don't want you here." She looked away. "You've done enough. I can't keep—" "You think this is charity?" His voice rose. "You think I've been helping you out of some sense of obligation? What else would it be?" He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "I'm in love with you." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him. "What?" Minho crossed the space between them, cupped her face with both hands. "I'm in love with you. Have been since the moment I saw you in that green dress. Since you texted me in the snow. Since you looked at me like I wasn't a monster. I'm in love with you and Nari and the life we're building. And you leaving? That's not protecting yourself. That's running because you're scared." Tears streamed down her face. "Of course I'm scared. You're Kang Minho. You're dangerous and powerful and you could have anyone. Why would you want me?" His eyes burned. "Because you're mine. Because the thought of you not being in my home, in my bed, in my life, makes me want to burn the world down. Because when I look at Nari, I see our future. Not yours, ours." He kissed her. Desperate, claiming. "Come home," she was crying now. "What if you change your mind? What if—" "I won't." His voice was absolute. "I don't change my mind about things that matter. And you matter more than anything." She looked at him, at the raw honesty in his eyes, at the way he held her like she was precious, and she made her choice. "Okay." Relief crashed through him. He pulled her close, careful of the baby between them. "Say it again." She smiled through tears. "Okay, I'll come home." He kissed her again, then looked down at Nari, sleeping peacefully through all the drama. "Both of you, forever." They went back to the penthouse. But as they walked through the door, Minho's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression went cold. "I have to take this." He walked into his office, closed the door. Belfrek heard raised voices, anger, then silence. When he came out, his face was grim. "What's wrong?" He looked at her. "Your ex-husband, he's not done. He's filed a custody suit, claims you're unfit, that you're living with a criminal. He wants Nari." Belfrek went cold. "He can't. He doesn't even want her. He wants to hurt you. And he's using her to do it." Minho's voice was tight. "But he's made a mistake." "What do you mean?" Minho's smile was dangerous. "He's threatened what's mine, and now he's going to learn what that costs." Before Belfrek could respond, the lights went out. The entire building went dark. Minho moved instantly, pushing her behind him. "Stay down," she heard footsteps. Many of them, coming from the elevator, from the stairs, surrounding them. Minho pulled his gun, his body a shield between her and whatever was coming. A voice called out from the darkness. Familiar, her ex-husband. "You really thought you could steal my wife and get away with it?" Belfrek's blood ran cold. Minho's voice was deadly calm. "She was never yours. She's the mother of my child. And I'm taking both of them back." The lights came on, and Belfrek's heart stopped. Her ex-husband stood in the center of the room, surrounded by armed men. More than Minho could fight alone. He smiled at her, cold. "Cruel, hello, darling. Miss me?"